I hereby open this session. Also the people on the internet, welcome to this special ceremony in which Federica Jiritano will defend the academic thesis, New Insights about Quantitative Platelet Disorders in the Cardiac Surgery and Mechanical Circulatory Support Settings. Dear candidate, may I invite you to share with us your findings in the next quarter of an hour. Good luck.
Thank you. Distinguished prorector, distinguished opponents, I will shortly present you my research project about quantitative platelet disorders in the cardiac surgery and mechanical circulatory support settings. Sorry. What is a platelet? A platelet is an enucleated elements deriving from megakaryocytes that are precursor of platelets in the bone marrow, and they are circulating in our blood vessels with a concentration ranging from 150 to 450,000 per microliter. They stay in our blood vessels for about 8 up to 10 days, and their main function is hemostasis, a process that allows to stop bleeding from a damaged vessel. When a platelet count reduces below 150,000 per microliter, we call the platelet reduction as thrombocytopenia. We can further classify thrombocytopenia in mild, moderate, and severe according to the degree of platelet reduction. And we can trace back the causes of thrombocytopenia in a decreased platelet production, in a higher platelet sequestration, an increased destruction, or hemodilution. However, the real issue is as thrombocytopenia a clinical importance, a clinical impact on a patient's life and a patient's course after, during his hospital stay, manifesting with bleeding, increased blood transfusion, and in the end maybe mortality. So the aim of the present research project was to analyze the platelet reduction and its eventual clinical impact on a particular kind of patient population. Those patients supported by a temporary mechanical circulatory to support the ECMO or extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, and the patient that receive bioprosthesis, a biological valve during an aortic valve replacement. So we performed a systematic review meta-analysis of all the studies analyzing platelets and patients supported by extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. We selected 21 papers, 7 of them analyzed also platelet function, and we included in our study both patients supported by veno-arterial ECMO for those patients who had a cardiac failure, and veno-venous ECMO for patients who had a respiratory failure. We found out that thrombocytopenia was present with a percentage of 21%. The time to reach the lowest platelet count ranged from 2 to 7 days. We observed also thrombocytopenia in both veno-arterial and VV ECMO, and we found out that it was a similar percentage, 23 and 25% respectively. And we looked also at the heparin-induced thrombocytopenia that was present in the overall population with a percentage of 3.7%. However, we think that this result could be underestimated considering the low cases of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia that are not diagnosed. Then the ECMO duration was found out not associated with thrombocytopenia, and an impaired platelet function was found during the ECMO run. We studied also this phenomenon in patients receiving biological prosthesis. This study was a sort of pilot study about a particular kind of bioprosthesis, sutureless bioprosthesis, a tissue valve that does not need any sutures to be implanted. We considered two kinds of groups: patients receiving an intuitive valve or rapid deployment valve, and a Perceval valve or sutureless. stentless valve. The aim of the study was to find the occurrence of thrombocytopenia and the eventual clinical adverse event associated with it. We observed that platelet count decreased in both groups. The Perceval group showed a lower platelet count from day 3 to the hospital discharge. The Perceval group received more platelet transfusion, and the Perceval bioprosthesis was found as an independent predictor of postoperative thrombocytopenia. It was natural to continue our research, performing a meta-analysis and systematic review about all the patients receiving an aortic bioprosthesis and to analyze any platelet count reduction. We concentrated our focus on the surgical group on which we performed the meta-analysis. We observed that platelet reduction was a common phenomenon, temporary phenomenon, and it occurred mainly in the rapid deployment and stentless valve patients, apparently without a clinical impact. Then we focused our attention on the TAVI patients, the transcatheter aortic valve implantation patients, where the thrombocytopenia was present with a percentage of about 55%. It was also a temporary phenomenon, and after a sub-analysis, we observed that thrombocytopenia occurred mainly after the implantation of a particular transcatheter aortic valve, the balloon expandable valve, the one that you can see on the right of the screen. The thrombocytopenia in TAVI patient was found associated with a high rate of transfusion and increased in hospital mortality rate. We had the chance also to analyze the data of the PERSIST-AVR clinical trial, a multi-center observational prospective randomized study comparing sutureless or Perceval valve versus a conventional stent bioprosthesis. The study was performed between 2016 and 2018 and enrolled more than 800 patients randomized one-to-one to a prosthesis or another. The aim of our sub-study was to find out thrombocytopenia and eventual clinical relations. We observed that a higher platelet reduction was shown for the Perceval group compared to the stented group. The minimum platelet count was found on the 4th day after the surgery. However, we didn't find any difference between the groups considering the blood transfusion and the postoperative blood loss. Thrombocytopenia was present in the Perceval group with a percentage higher than the control group. However, no difference in bleeding and stroke events was found, and no predictors were found associated with platelet reduction in the Perceval group. We pushed forward our research with the portrait study about surgical and transcatheter aortic bioprosthesis. We performed two sub-studies. The surgical aortic sub-study considered just surgical valves. The aim was to identify platelet reduction and eventual clinical impact of it. We enrolled more than 1,200 patients, divided into three groups according to the type of the valve received, the stent, the rapid deployment, and the stentless bioprosthesis. We observed that platelet reduction had the minimum value on the 3rd day after surgery. It was present with a higher degree in the stentless and the rapid deployment group. There is a different behavior according not only to the type of the prosthesis but also to the size of the prosthesis. The platelet reduction was found not influenced by the cardiopulmonary and cross-clamp times, and the rapid deployment group showed the high rate of transfusion and reoperation for bleedings. Moreover, platelet reduction was found associated with ischemic stroke. Considering the transcatheter sub-study of the portrait trial, instead, our aim was to find the thrombocytopenia and its clinical impact. We enrolled more than 1,100 patients, dividing the patients into two groups in the balloon expandable and self-expanding valve. A propensity score matching was performed, obtaining two groups of more than 300 patients. And we observed that platelet count changed according to a parabolic curve with the minimum platelet count value on day 3 and the platelet count, the thrombocytopenia was present with a percentage of almost 15% and was similar between the two groups. The main findings was that thrombocytopenia was significantly associated with a higher rate of transfusion, higher rate, prolonged intensive care unit and in-hospital stay, and increased mortality rate. We can conclude that platelet count decreases both in the extracorporeal membrane oxygenation and aortic bioprosthesis patient. The mechanism underlying the process are several, I think, after my study. It involves a mechanical destruction due to shear stress, patient-related factors, and also a platelet activation due to an inflammatory response. Thrombocytopenia is present in this kind of patients, ECMO and patient receiving an aortic bioprosthesis with a different grade of severity. But the main finding is that it is associated with a poor clinical outcome, manifesting with need for transfusion, bleeding, and also mortality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now commence with the defense, but not before introducing both your supervisors, Professor Lorusso and Professor Maassen, who will not ask questions to you. I hope you can agree with that because they tested you enough, didn't they? Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Then we continue with the opposition, and opposition will be started with Professor Hacking. He's professor of biochemistry at this institute, and he was also the chair of the reading committee. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. Dear candidate, let me first offer you my compliments on this impressive thesis. It's very coherent, it's a lot of work. It also has led to some publications. In the end, you have an addendum in which you show 63 publications, which I looked up, have together already been cited more than 743 times, leading to an H index of 17. Which for me is beyond amazing for a scientist of your age, which I will not disclose. But congratulations on that. In your introduction, you state that platelets are activating during your procedures by a mix of physical and biological processes. Which you think is the most important, like the foreign surfaces or the enzyme-dependent activation of your platelets?
Thank you, esteemed opponent. I think that the process is a mixed process. I think that both mechanisms could interfere and in the end determining thrombocytopenia. The main I think that the process is evolving. So the first step of the process, I think, is due to a mechanical destruction of platelets, because platelets are forced to pass through something that are not used to. So it could be the circuit of the extracorporeal membrane oxygenation or a new prosthesis. So the first thing that happens, I think, is first mechanical. Then there is an inflammatory response, I think, or something linked. I think that all these are speculation, because nothing is then proved, because I say I think, after all my study is what I am capable of process. Not only platelet activation, but also a platelet dysfunction. So the platelet can change its shape and receptor shed.
That is just the activation process. But what I also found is that you also state that the platelets are activated by extrinsic coagulation. So where do you think does the tissue factor come from?
Where the tissue factor come from and activate the process.
Right. So, and then, of course, assuming that platelets do not have tissue factor.
Platelets, sorry?
Do not have tissue factor. So where does the tissue factor come from?
The tissue factor...
because you would not expect that, because why is there tissue factor? Also in an extracorporeal system, where is it coming from, do you think?
I think that the tissue factor could be enhanced from the systemic inflammation from other organs that allow them to to be released in the bloodstream and then interact with platelets.
Yeah, because you also described these platelet leukocyte aggregates, and when there's monocytes involved, that could very well be the source of the tissue factor. To try to inhibit it, you use heparin most of the time to kill the coagulation process. But of course, that brings the danger of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. So have you ever considered another different anticoagulant, or why not?
Yeah, I thought about that, but literature is still lacking about consistent evidence about this phenomenon. When we performed our systematic review meta-analysis, we didn't find so many papers considering bivalirudin or argatroban associated with the platelet count reduction.
Yeah, but I'm talking about more modern anticoagulants. And of course, you're a pioneer,
no,
so there will not be any literature about it.
No, we didn't study anything like that, but our future research will focus rather than just the heparin anticoagulation, and so an eventual occurrence of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia.
Yes, I understand, but I would just like to have you propose what could you use as a different anticoagulant in your patient? Are there some?
Except of heparin.
No heparin. Heparin's out. So you have to choose something else.
In some.
We have direct inhibitors.
Direct factor 10 inhibitors could. The main limits could be the negative complication of use this kind of anticoagulants. Heparin is easier to manage because we have an antagonist. It's cheap. Other anticoagulants are much more challenging to
Well, the bigger trend
control.
against thrombin also has a very nice antagonist, and there's one coming for the 10A.
Yeah, it's not
so
as
you don't think this will be successful? You would not like to try this?
It's something to explore. I think it's something to explore.
But would you support it, or you will stick to heparin?
No. I'm not sick with heparin. Our research are also exploring extracorporeal membrane oxygenation without heparin. So without any anticoagulants, in some conditions we can perform ECMO without any kind of anticoagulants to avoid also bleeding complication. However, we should consider an high rate of the ECMO run to avoid the circuit thrombosis and all the complications that could be linked with it.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy with your answer. I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much, Professor Hakking. I will now give the floor to Professor Van den Briele. He's a professor in cardiology and cardiac intensive care at the Royal Brompton and Harefield NHS Foundation Trust in London. So the floor is yours, and thank you for being here all this way. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. Dear candidate, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to congratulate you and your team. It's a big achievement, and especially like to read your intensive care medicine review, which I enjoyed reading very much. I do have a few questions. First of all, the title of your thesis is Quantitative Platelet Disorders. That's nice to have a number, but I'm also very interested in the qualitative working of your platelets. So should we focus on the number? Should we focus on what the platelets are doing, or should we focus on both? And how would you advise to measure the platelet function in those critically ill, especially on mechanical support?
Okay. Thank you, esteemed opponent. Yes, my thesis is about quantitative platelet disorders. Now, I would have liked to add the word qualitative, but I hadn't the sufficient data to bring and to show to you. Yes, I think that as I told you, both the process occurred during the ECMO run, so qualitative dysfunction and quantitative, so a reduction of platelet count. Measuring the platelet function is not so easy. I observed that it is not so easy, and there are a lot of point-of-care testing devices. However, I learned that they are not so specific. Most of all, when we have a platelet count that is so low, below 100,000 per microliter, we cannot assess the platelet function with the point-of-care device. The only technique that allows us to really estimate and assess the function of platelets when they are when they have a reduced platelet count is the flow cytometry. However, it is expensive. It is not it is not available. Maybe in all the hospitals, it's not so immediate and fast to obtain results from that. But I think that is the most specific and the one that we should use.
Okay, thank you. In line with this, we know that if platelets are running for a few days during the ECMO support, that there is attachment to the plastic surface due to consumption coagulopathy and attachment with fibrin. Do you think those platelets still work?
Some could work. Thank you for the question, estimated professor, estimated opponent. I think that some of the platelets work and are not. I don't know in which percentage, because the process is unexplored yet. But there are a small. I think that there are a small quantity, a small percentage of platelet that works correctly, and another percentage may be the same, I think 50-50 or maybe even higher, that are not properly working, that change their shape, and so there is not a correct working of platelets and that adhere to the circuit surface and could cause also.
So what would you advise me as an intensivist on the ICU if my platelets drop below 60,000? Should I give platelet pools?
Below
60,000, 50,000.
Yeah, I think you should transfuse patients with that kind of platelet count. I think I should transfuse the patient with a blood pool, with a platelet pool.
And if a patient goes on mechanical support after an anterior STEMI and I put in a stent in the LAD, should I give dual antiplatelets?
Thank you for the question, esteemed opponent. Yeah, I think this is an interesting, challenging question. I thought about it. And yes, antiplatelets could prevent from platelet activation and then maybe dysfunction and so on. There are a lot of antiplatelets we could use, and I think that a possible strategy to adopt is not to give the patient aspirin, because some patients could not respond to aspirin, but to Kangaroo maybe, that it is easier to use it, his action could last just an hour, and so could be a strategy. However, we have to explore this aspect of this. Maybe in the future study, we will look at it.
Okay, thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you, Professor Van den Brielen. We now continue the opposition with Professor Wouters. He's a professor of anesthesiology and clinical physiology from the University Hospital Ghent, Belgium. Welcome.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidate, I joined the club of my colleagues who congratulated you. You have delivered an impressive amount of work. I say you, but I mean your team has delivered, and your supervisors undoubtedly had an important impact on that. You combined this with clinical work. Did you combine all this research with clinical work?
With the clinical work, yes.
Okay, that makes my appreciation even bigger. Now, my question, it will not surprise you that it comes from an anesthesiology view. and where we usually are listening to surgeons who declare to the patients if something goes wrong, surgery was excellent, so it must be an anesthesiology problem. I read on page 277 that all the factors that you correctly identified, like hemodilution, hemoconcentration, the use of serine protease inhibitors, etc., they may vary with centers, and they may have an impact on thrombocytopenia. But given the size of the cohort we were able to recruit, we think those factors had no significant impact on the incidence of thrombocytopenia. So for once, anesthesia is not guilty. But I don't agree this time. How can you make a statement that you think it doesn't play a role?
Thank you for the question. Sorry, can you repeat me the page of where are you referring
277, I think. You said, given the size of the cohort, we think the factors, and then I assume these are the anesthesiology factors that you correctly identified, had no significant impact on your findings, incidence of thrombocytopenia.
I didn't find it.
Halfway the page. It's in the discussion.
277?
Yes. 277, huh?
Okay.
But regardless of the page, it's easy that, I mean, I can explain to you. You say the anesthesiology factors probably had no importance.
No, thank you for the question. Do you mean the hemodilution issue?
All of them. I would
all of them, and the hemodilution and the hemoconcentration, the fluid management.
Fluid management, but also the use of heparin and protamine is not standardized within centers.
All these aspects interfere. We cannot say that there is not an action from heparin or the fluid management. The fluid management is difficult to study, to analyze, also to collect data about fluid management. We could have a patient that have a pseudothrombocytopenia just because maybe it is cardiac arrest, for example. So a lot of fluids could have been administered to the patient. So thrombocytopenia is presenting just before the implanting, for example, of the ECMO, or a patient that is going to be a patient receiving an aortic bioprosthesis could have other pre-existing factor that could lead to pseudothrombocytopenia. Yes, these are factors that should be considered to analyze better this aspect. We could eliminate, could delete all this bias and to conduct a prospective study. Our analysis has been performed mainly on retrospective, so a lot of these conditions should not be. We couldn't be able. We were not be able to avoid these confounding factors. For example, we didn't analyze the fluid management, and also considering the heparin administration. We found studies in a meta-analysis and systematic review that declared the use of, for example, the heparin, low-weight molecular heparin, but not all the studies reported that. So the only way to discover this aspect and to study this aspect is to perform a prospective study about it. I think so.
And that was the conclusion of your discussion, indeed. Would it make sense to go back to your data and look at inter-center differences?
Yes, it could be done, but it is a retrospective study of almost 10 years, and we were not be able to have all the data about it, even calling each center. Therefore, this is one of the limitations of the study.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please.
You still have time for a short question.
Well, my intriguing finding was that, thank you for allowing me the second question. I hope I do not interfere with my colleagues' questions, but your meta-analysis showed that thrombocytopenia is, quote, literally clinically insignificant, meaningless even, was written, while your own findings,
Is not
retrospectively obtained, said there was a strong link between thrombocytopenia and clinical events. Well, I always learned that randomized or meta-analysis and systematic reviews were higher in the hierarchy of clinical or evidence, scientific evidence, than retrospective studies. How do you combine this statement, this paradox?
Yeah. Thank you for the question.
You may give a short answer.
Yeah, yes, it's true. Meta-analysis is at a higher value than a retrospective analysis. However, the studies included in the meta-analysis hadn't as a main objective to analyze platelet count rather than our study. So I think that our research project, our studies are better, are more focused on that goal than the other included in the meta-analysis.
Thank you very much. No other questions.
Thank you, Professor Wouters. Then we continue with Professor Serraino. He has a chair in cardiac surgery at the University Hospital at Catanzaro, Italy. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Prorector. Dear candidate, thank you very much for your presentation. And we really appreciate your data. And thank you because, as you said, you combined your research with your clinical activity, which is really important. And we heard about your age index or the number of publications. That's really great for you. So I have a few questions. First of all, as my previous colleague said, we know that meta-analyses are on the top of best evidence medicine, like as prospective randomized controlled trial. But I think a lot of data could be missed when you treat meta-analysis or retrospective data. And probably this is the reason why we do have differences between studies, your data, and the other studies, where we don't find a connection between thrombocytopenia and clinical events. Do you think there is something more we need to say, or we need to see about the platelets? I mean, not just the count itself, first. Second, I would like to ask you whether there is, I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon, so I'm much more interested than biochemistry about clinical events. So do you think we could find a predictor for clinical events for our patients?
Thank you, esteemed opponent, for the questions. Really interesting. Okay, for the first question, yes, I think that platelets are not just a number. Considering the patients, we cannot consider just a number with the patient, but we should consider also platelet function, as I told before. And this aspect should be much more analyzed in the future with prospective studies. We tried and we observed just for the ECMO patients, just few studies analyzing that aspects. In that studies, that are 7 presenting some results in literature, we observed that there is somehow loss of receptor or a higher function that brings to platelet, in the beginning platelet aggregation and then consumption, so platelet decrease. We didn't find any study reporting platelet function in a patient receiving an aortic bioprosthesis. So rather than or in addition to the ECMO patients, we should concentrate our study, our future study, more on that patients. Also because transcatheter aortic valves are implantation are increasing, and so exposing a patient to maybe an adverse event linked to platelet count, not just reduction, but also dysfunction, should be interested to study and to treat. Maybe we could tailor a therapy for this kind of patient. Then for the second question, predictor for thrombocytopenia. We observed in the
predictor for clinical events.
Clinical events linked to thrombocytopenia. We observed in the sub-study of the portrait study, including the transcatheter aortic valve patients, that we performed another analysis that you couldn't find in this thesis because it was something requested later by a reviewer and then accepted for publication. We calculated and analyzed the predictor factors for thrombocytopenia associated to clinical events, and our results show that baseline platelet count was found as a predictor factor for bad clinical events in the postoperative course, as for example hepatic cirrhosis. So what is important is to analyze the patient-related factors. We tried at most to clean our data and to avoid any biases that could interfere with our results. But at the end, a patient, for example, submitted to a TAVI is in most of cases, a patient that is fragile, that has a lot of comorbidities. Even if nowadays TAVI are implanted in younger patients, the population that receive TAVI is mostly old population. So patient-related factors are something that we should not forget, should not miss. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do I still have time for? No.
Well, I'll keep it for later. Right. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Ten Kate. Today he's from the Department of Biochemistry at this university and is also the secretary of this committee.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, I admire your work and the fact that you combine cardiac surgery with research. It's fantastic. And I'm glad we even published some together, so I cannot be too critical about chapter 2, for instance. A lot has been said about the importance of quantitative platelet disorders, as you say in the title. I was wondering whether you could replace that with thrombocytopenia. On the other hand, but basically, well, the title could perhaps be quantitative and qualitative platelet disorders to make it more complete, or just thrombocytopenia. Let's go. Well, one more word about the thrombocytopenia. In your answers to the other opponents, you also said that perhaps following platelet counts in your patients would trigger a platelet transfusion to reduce the risk of bleeding. Is that a policy that you apply in your patients? Do you follow up platelet counts and then use that as a trigger for transfusion?
Thank you for the question, esteemed opponent. In our center, we analyze the blood count every day after the operation until the 5th postoperative day. And then if the patient is still in the hospital, we perform a blood analysis one day or another. So we could we could track the platelet count during every day after implantation or after the ECMO run, and understand when is the right time to do a platelet pool transfusion. However, our cutoff for platelet transfusion is below 30,000 per microliter, not higher blood count. So when there is a severe thrombocytopenia.
Yeah, that's a conservative, but probably also
yeah,
a safe
it's
policy.
much conservative. we interact with the hemotransfusion department, and at the end our protocol is that.
Yeah, that's probably very wise. You also mentioned patient-related factors. I can assume that, for instance, anemia is also a risk factor for bleeding in these patients. Do you consider that prior to surgery, and is that a reason for more forward transfusion of red cells? Or
thank you for the question, esteemed opponent. Anemia could be a risk factor, but we didn't analyze it, so I cannot say that is a predictive factor for thrombocytopenia. And yes, of course, it's a predictive factor for blood events, but we observed that in other studies in literature. We could find that anemic patient had a clinical outcome that is worse because of anemia. An anemic patient is a patient that receives much more blood transfusion rather than platelet transfusion, even if you administered to the patient more than 3 blood pool, you should administer also 1 platelet pool. So it is something that has a continuous feedback.
It's linked.
It's linked. Yes, it's bidirectional. An anemic patient requires blood, and then you have to administer a platelet pool, even if in the beginning you didn't think about it because maybe it's not needed. But I think that this is linked much more to the blood transfusion than to the patient itself.
I understand.
Just to maintain a good
a final
balance.
Short question. You discussed with Professor Hacking also the alternatives for heparin, for instance, but you said, I'd like to stick to heparin because it's cheap, I have a good antagonist, etc. I had an interesting discussion with Professor van den Brielen about inhibitors of contact activation. Would you see a future for that, for inhibiting factor 12, for instance, as a means to block coagulation, but also maybe to reduce the amount of heparin needed? Would that be an avenue?
Thank you for the question, esteemed opponent. Rather than that, I think that we should better monitor the heparin function, real function in the blood of the patient, not with ACT or APTT, but better maybe with anti-factor 10 activation, and something that could better quantify the real function of heparin. In that way, we could manage better the patient. However, yes, there are new drugs that we could use, so why not?
Yeah. Well, if they come available, indeed, so far it's still an illusion. So
maybe I don't exclude anything.
Thank you for your answers. I'm very happy to give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much. We continue. You're doing okay, right?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Then we continue.
Thanks.
Professor Gelsomino, he is has a chair in cardiothoracic surgery from this institute. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I know that I will be repeating, but I cannot do nothing but congratulating again, once more again, with you and your co-promoters for your excellent work, but also with you for your outstanding scientific outputs. And let me say that it makes me happy twice, because you live and work in my birth region, my beloved Calabria and neglected Calabria. So this makes me also proud that such a researcher lives and works in my region. So I'm very happy of that. But giving up let's say, any kind of romanticism and going back to science, in chapter 5 and 6, and also you said that in your presentation, you observed that patients receiving sutureless and rapid deployment valves, they had a high count reduction in platelet count. Can you postulate a little bit on that?
Thank you for the question, similar opponent. Yes, sutureless or rapid deployment valve have a particular design. I think that this factor could interfere a lot with the process. A lot of studies have been performed in the beginning thinking about the storage solution of this particular prosthesis, because the storage solution of this prosthesis contained homocystic acids, and it was thought that it could have cause damage when the valve is released in the heart, and the interaction of the blood with the homocystic acid could interfere with the platelet, causing platelet destruction. However, other studies confirm that the percentage of homocystic acid in the blood vessel, the concentration in the circulating blood is too low to cause platelet destruction and platelet damage. So other ideas came to try to give an explanation to platelet reduction in sutureless valves. One of them that I think is much more probable is that sutureless valves are manipulated before implantation. They are like crimped, like the TAVI valve, and then released. So there are not like the common conventional sutured valves that are just taken from the pack and put in the patient. So this could be one of the reasons they are not so perfect. They are just touched before the implantation. And another aspect that I think is not sufficient being studied is that a platelet a paravalvular leak could occur in these valves, like in the sutureless valves, as in the TAVI valves, maybe for considering the sutureless valves an incomplete decalcification of the annulus that cause an inadequate expansion of the valves in the annulus. So a paravalvular leak could cause higher blood turbulence through the valve and through the leak, causing much more shear stress and so on. Another mechanism could be also the initial beginning of the implanting of these valves and oversizing. It has been so that an oversizing of this kind of valves could impact also the hemodynamic performance of the valve, and also a correct deployment of the leaflets, and therefore turbulence and shear stress.
I fully agree with you, because this is seen from a surgical, cardiac surgery point of view. I have just another very quick question. In chapter 2, you have the same, platelet or thrombocytopenia in VV and VA ECMO. Do you think the mechanism leading to such a thrombocytopenia is different, can be the same?
Thank you for the question, esteemed opponent. I think yes, the percentage is similar, but the mechanism underlying the process could be different because we have two ECMO modes, VA patient and VV patients, and two different kind of patients. The patients supported by a veno arterial ECMO are patients with a cardiac failure, maybe a cardiac arrest or post-cardiotomy patients. And so they could have a baseline disease that could interfere with thrombocytopenia in the end. The venous ECMO patients instead are patients with a respiratory failure, but the functioning of the VV ECMO requires a high speed for the correct oxygenation for the patients. So high speed of the ECMO run could cause also higher platelet destruction due to a mechanical destruction.
Okay, thank you very much. Word back to the prorector. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gelsomino. Then the opposition will be continued by Dr. Bidar. He works in the Department of Cardiothoracic Surgery of the Maastricht University.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidate, dear Federica, again, congratulations. It's not only a lot of work, but it's also very well written. And I would like to congratulate your team for this fantastic work. I would like to zoom out a little bit with you and try to look at blood as a liquid organ instead of a vehicle. Mm-hmm. So imagine this organ, you're using an extracorporeal an ECMO or a CPB. How do you protect this organ during this within this machine?
Thank you for the question, esteemed opponent. Yes, it's a challenging question. Blood is considered also when you perform a blood transfusion, you are performing like an organ donation. It's true. It is neglected. This aspect is often neglected, and we transfuse like we have a limited amount of blood to give to the patient. How can we protect the blood vessels? It's difficult to protect blood.
So just think simple. Think of Virchow's triad, for example. Virchow's triad. So you prevent stasis of blood by
circulating,
circulating
of
so
the
you
pump.
Prevent, yeah. You give heparin.
Yes,
to reduce hypercoagulability.
Yeah, we give heparin not to protect blood, to protect the deformation of blood thrombus and then emboli for the patient. Yes, but.
So how could you protect it? Because in your thesis, in several places you describe, for example, the size of the bioprosthesis might contribute to damage also to the thrombocytes.
Yeah. Yes. It was a particular finding we observed.
So would you say the size of the cannula would matter?
Yes, I think that
arterial cannula.
Yes, I think that the size of the cannula could have an impact of the blood components overall, but we have also to balance the cannula with the patient and to the vessels. Well, so we should have a compromise with that.
But have you considered looking
I think
at
that we should choose the highest cannula, highest size cannula. That is compatible to the patients. So yes, I think that a smaller cannula could cause a higher turbulence, higher shear stress, and then also hemolysis, also rather than just platelet count decrease. So yes, I think that it could interfere.
So another very short question. So, and then I would like to go to chapter 6, where you do something very brave, you find an association with between thrombocytopenia and stroke, for example, but in a population which is really prone to stroke by other confounders, aortic valve replacement itself. And then you conclude that rapid deployment valves are predictor of this event. But I think you're missing a very important confounder, which is in page 219, and that is the type of surgery that is performed in this particular group.
Okay. The type of surgery?
Well, I see that you used for the rapid deployment valves, more than 50% has been done through minimal invasive, through mini sternotomy or right lateral thoracotomy. So in these patients, usually probably a groin cannulation was used. Would you consider that a...
Yeah, thank you for the question, esteemed opponent. You mean if the access could increase the percentage of stroke in this kind of patients? The rapid deployment valve are much likely released during a mini-invasive surgery. But I think that manipulating aorta, like for example in the foot sternotomy patient, could be could lead to a higher risk than performing a cannulation of the femoral artery or subclavian artery or so on. So I think that on the contrary, foot sternotomy patients, the patients with the foot sternotomy access, and so manipulation of the ascending aorta could have a higher risk of stroke, of course, than those cannulated peripherically.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bidar. And the opposition will be closed by Dr. Miani, who is a postdoctoral researcher at this university. The floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you, Prorector, for your presentation, and thank you for this important job, dear candidates. I would like to congratulate for your important results and also the insight that you gave in the literature. So as an intensivist, I read this thesis with a lot of pleasure. And in chapter 2, you state and you did not find any association between ECMO duration and platelets reduction. And that surprised me. So would you comment on that?
Thank you, esteemed opponent. Yes, this finding surprised also us when we obtained it. We think that at the beginning we thought that there was a relationship between the ECMO run, so the time of the patient on ECMO, and the platelet count reduction. But after we analyzed our data, we didn't find an association. So we thought that this could be explained with a sort of endothelialization process that occurs mainly in the oxygenator, and that lasts for the first days of the ECMO run. After the days of the lifespan of the platelets, so the new platelets that are then circulating the blood circuit are not exposed as the platelets of the prior generation to the same insults, to the same injuries, because there is a new endothelium on this surface, so less inflammatory response and less shear stress.
Okay, thank you. I'm satisfied with the answer. Maybe the last burning question: do you think we have predictors for platelets drop in this patient, I mean in the mechanical support patient?
Thank you for the question. I think there are a lot of predictors. We should analyze, of course, the patient-related factors that are an important factors, not always considered, but every patient is different. We should tailor our therapy, and ECMO is a treatment that allows therapy to.
You may finish your question or remain forever silent, so it's your choice.
I can finish if you want.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of predictors are present for the ECMO run that should have been considered, but mainly the patient-related factors. So baseline disease, first of all.
The candidate, as you probably guessed, the time is up. We now will withdraw. And we await and get to a verdict, and we ask you to wait here until we come back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, please.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. I know what's on the line. I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Hit the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. What's on the line? I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Dear candidate, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the title and degree of doctor. Professor Le Rousseau is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, in person, I hereby confer upon you, Federica Jiritano, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, you receive now the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the supervisor, affixed with the official seal of the university as here. So, you think you did everything, but not yet. I think, dear Federica, it was yesterday, at least to me, when you arrived in Maastricht at the MUMC and you started your research fellowship also at Karim. Your scientific experience was a little bit low, we can say that. And you asked for a period to be spent here with us, to begin with your research project and to be considered as a PhD fellow. You immediately showed yourself as a reliable and dedicated person with a clear personal commitment towards the objective, and I would say towards the interest in becoming more involved in clinical investigation and become a real surgical researcher. Honestly, I remember the time when I gave you the topic, and you look at me and you said, seriously? And I said, certainly it's not an easy one for a cardiac surgeon, but we knew from the very beginning you could make it, and at the end you did not argue, you did not complain. And I remember well that at the end of the discussion we had, you agreed that this would have been an interesting topic to be involved in and with promising opportunities. A few years after, I'm really happy to stand in front of you in this occasion and to have such a nice, I would say, wonderful thesis in our hands. I think you agree with me, I'm sure. Relevant clinical studies have been performed, some of them published in prestigious international journals. We had the opportunity, by the way, and I would say the most important thing, to work with many outstanding groups and persons, some of them here today with us. And the initial vision could be accomplished with some, I must say, satisfaction, which is not always so immediate. I must say, great satisfaction. But we always prefer working than talking, right?
Yeah.
Remember, huh? Never talk, just work. You were able to catch the opportunities given to you in a very professional and reliable way. You showed the motivation and perseverance which were not really common. And I'm delighted to see your constant positive scientific growth, and I should say your attitude towards an academic career. I think you demonstrated enough this attitude and your scientific values in this direction, and I do hope that you will have the opportunity to express your features and strengths in this setting, with some more guidance maybe, I think, a little bit, which I'm sure you will receive by the people surrounding you. We do really need young talents, and particularly committed young surgical investigators. That is really my, I would say, a sort of a mission. Unfortunately, we must admit that it's more and more difficult to discover young investigators. And once we meet them, we are glad and somehow relieved that the future in the cardiac surgery research, at least this is my view, will not be cloudy and obscure, but instead bright and still playing a role in cardiovascular medicine, particularly for our patients. I use this opportunity, besides expressing my sincere compliments to you and for the work done, to launch a personal plea to you and somehow to all the young cardiac surgeons. You showed how important is the multidisciplinary collaboration and the great opportunity given by such a scientific challenge. I mean, the topic was certainly not of the most favorite from a young cardiac surgeon. But you showed that we can fly high, being able to realize for sure interesting investigation and create the basis for larger and more meaningful cooperation. Please bring this message to your young colleagues and try to represent an example that many of them should follow and pursue, and explaining them how sterile and hostile would be a future world with surgeons dedicated only in pure clinical activity, without any interest in science and progress in knowledge. Leonardo da Vinci, you know, I must quote it, stated the following: by nature, mankind is committed and oriented to explore and gain knowledge. I think that this is my hope and my wish for your future endeavors. Be always curious and committed to explore and improve the knowledge, particularly in the cardiac surgery setting where you are involved in which we still have a big need of better science and research. So please be an example. I wish finally to congratulate you, your family and friends, your mentors, and also the people also present here who gave us the opportunity to collaborate for the objectives accomplished with, I think, and the reason why we are here today together. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Dear Dr. Jiritano, congratulations on behalf of Maastricht University. You are now an alumni of this university, so that never goes away. Be careful with your diploma. Don't try to fold it, because then the seal breaks and we have to make a new one. You did very well. You were able to answer questions from a very broad area of expertise. They grilled you, but you survived and you did excellent. So you can be very proud of what you achieved today. I wish you all the best, and do not do stupid things, but stay in your area of research and your area of clinical expertise, because we need people like you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I will now conclude this session, but before I do that, I think we have the picture on the stairs. Okay, then we close the session.